Alex had always loved the serenity of their suburban home, nestled in a quiet corner of the neighborhood, surrounded by tree-lined streets and houses that looked like something out of a picture book. Life felt simple, safe, and predictable. Mornings were spent with coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the perfectly manicured lawns, while evenings were filled with the distant laughter of children playing and the comforting hum of neighbors chatting on porches. The neighborhood was peaceful, almost too peaceful. But in the back of Alex's mind, there was always the HOA, lurking like a shadow. The Homeowners Association. They weren't outright terrible, but they had an undeniable presence, always watching. Alex had dealt with their meddling over the years. Complaints about fence height, the exact shade of paint on the mailbox, and of course, the ever-growing fees. Every year, the price seemed to inch up a little, but nothing major, nothing to truly worry about. That's what they told themselves. Then, one Friday morning, everything changed. The letter arrived unannounced, its sleek white envelope a stark contrast to the usual assortment of bills and flyers. It wasn't even folded, just an ominous rectangular slab of paper. Alex's hand trembled as they tore it open, expecting a routine HOA update or some new bylaws to review. But what they read made the world tilt. Effective immediately, there will be an increase in monthly dues by 500%. The words jumped off the page, but the meaning didn't settle in right away. 500%. That couldn't be right. Alex blinked, rereading the line again, then the third time. Each repetition felt more suffocating. Their mind raced, trying to understand how something like this could happen. It was beyond comprehension. The letter continued, explaining that the increase was needed for emergency neighborhood improvements, which, to Alex's mind, seemed like a vague excuse. Emergency improvements. The streets were fine, the lawns were green, and the community was well maintained. Nothing looked in disrepair. In fact, the only thing broken was the HOA's ever-growing demands. Alex's pulse quickened. This wasn't just an increase. It was a financial chokehold. A rush of anger and disbelief flooded their chest. How could they do this? Grabbing their phone, Alex quickly checked the bank account, calculating the new dues against their monthly budget. The numbers didn't lie. There was no way they could afford this hike. No way. It was as if the HOA were daring them to rebel. Alex marched into the kitchen, holding the letter like a weapon, heart pounding in their ears. Their fingers curled around the edges of the paper as they took a deep breath. What was their next move? What could they do? They had no choice but to go to the next HOA meeting. But as they stared out the window, watching the neighbors begin their day, a gnawing suspicion crept in. No one else had mentioned a word. Was anyone else even aware of the change yet? Or was this a tactic to catch everyone off guard, to slip it through unnoticed? It hit Alex like a punch to the gut. This was deliberate. The HOA had been slowly tightening its grip on the neighborhood. And now, with this move, they had crossed a line. The meeting was in 2 days. The thought of it made Alex's stomach twist. But deep down, they knew this wouldn't be a normal meeting. This wasn't just about a fee increase anymore. It was a challenge. And for the first time in years, Alex felt a spark of something far more dangerous than fear: defiance. What was the HOA playing at? And how far would they go to get their way? Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the world was spinning just a little bit faster as the hours passed after receiving the HOA's letter. It had been a restless night, filled with dark thoughts and the ceaseless buzzing of questions. How could something like this happen so suddenly? Was the HOA acting alone, or were they somehow working with other, more powerful forces? Alex was more determined than ever to attend the HOA meeting, but that determination was mixed with a gnawing sense of dread. By the time the meeting rolled around, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Alex dressed in a quiet rage, pulling on a jacket and heading toward the community center where the meeting would take place. The building, a drab structure that felt more like a prison than a place of discussion, loomed in front of them. It wasn't just a building. It was the fortress that held the power to control everything. As Alex stepped into the room, the tension was immediate. The air was thick with murmurs, the uneasy buzz of residents trying to make sense of what had happened. A few familiar faces glanced over, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief, but no one spoke up. Not yet. The large conference table at the front of the room was occupied by the board members, all sitting with cold, indifferent faces. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room. They didn't need to say anything to know they were in control. The president of the HOA, Greg Stevens, a middle-aged man with a permanent sneer, tapped his gavel on the wood. The room fell silent, save for the distant hum of air conditioning and the low murmur of background chatter. "Welcome, neighbors," Greg said, his voice smooth and practiced, like a salesman trying to sell you a product you didn't need. "I'm sure you're all aware of the letter we sent out. The new fee structure is necessary to improve our community's infrastructure." A few grumbles rippled through the crowd. Alex's fingers clenched around the back of a chair, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions racing through them. Improvement? The streets were fine. The sidewalks were fine. The parks were fine. None of this made sense. Greg continued, his voice growing more self-assured with each word. "The 500% increase is a temporary measure, but it is vital to maintain the quality of life here. We've seen declining funds, and some of our resources are severely lacking. Rest assured, this is in the best interest of everyone here." But Alex wasn't convinced. Lacking resources. For what? Alex scanned the faces of the board members sitting behind him. They looked bored, like they'd already made up their minds, and had no interest in what anyone else had to say. They were immune to the residents' concerns, but Alex wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. A hand shot up from the back of the room. A neighbor, Sarah, who'd lived in the community for years. "Greg, can you explain exactly what this fee is for? I haven't seen any projects, no construction work, nothing." There was a brief pause, the kind of pregnant silence that made Alex's stomach tighten. The board members exchanged looks, but Greg was quick to respond. "As I said, this increase is necessary for some new developments, more landscaping, upgrades to the community pool, and new security measures. Things you can't see right now, but they will be coming." Alex felt a flicker of suspicion in the pit of their stomach. New security measures, landscaping, why now? But before Alex could formulate a question, Greg quickly added, "I understand this might be a hard pill to swallow, but we've worked long and hard on these plans, and they're in the best interest of the community. Any opposition to this proposal will only slow down progress." The way he said it, so casually, made Alex's blood run cold. Opposition. A wave of anxiety swept over the room as residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked hesitant, others, like Sarah, looked angry, but no one spoke up. There was an unspoken fear in the air, fear of retribution, fear of being ostracized. Alex could see it in the way people avoided making eye contact, the way they shifted in their chairs, the way they kept glancing toward the board, waiting for the next word of approval or condemnation. But it wasn't just fear of being singled out. It was something darker, a sense that the HOA wasn't just trying to control the neighborhood's finances. They were trying to control the people, too. Then, out of nowhere, another resident, Paul, stood up. His voice trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is outrageous. We've never seen a fee increase like this before. You can't just..." Before Paul could finish, a security guard appeared at the door, his presence looming over the room like a silent threat. Alex's eyes widened. It was clear now. This wasn't a community meeting. This was a show of power, and anyone who challenged it would be silenced. Paul's voice trailed off as the guard stepped forward, his expression unreadable. And as Paul sat down, defeated, Alex's heart raced. The question hanging in the air was no longer just about the fee hike. It was about what the HOA was willing to do to keep their control. And Alex knew one thing for certain. They weren't just going to let it slide. The meeting had ended in a slow, suffocating silence. As the last of the residents filed out, many kept their heads low, avoiding eye contact with one another. Alex's pulse thudded in their ears. The atmosphere was thick with something unspoken, an undercurrent of fear, of submission. The HOA had won, at least for now, but not for long. Outside, Alex stood in the cool evening air, taking deep breaths, trying to clear the fog of frustration clouding their mind. The cold bite of the night didn't help. It only made the anger burn hotter, sharper. How could they just do this? How could they take so much and give nothing in return? The HOA's smugness, their utter disregard for the residents, felt like a personal affront. There was a moment of hesitation, a flicker of doubt. Was it even worth fighting back? The HOA had all the power, money, resources, legal clout. The residents? They had nothing, except for their voice, their collective will. But how could they win against such an entrenched system? What are they willing to do to make this right? The question gnawed at Alex as they walked home, the evening shadows stretching long across the sidewalk, pulling the night with them. They couldn't let this slide. Not after everything the HOA had done. It was more than the fees now. It was about taking back control. The deeper they thought about it, the clearer it became. The HOA was taking advantage of everyone. And Alex wasn't about to sit quietly while they bled the neighborhood dry. That night, Alex sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of a lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The letter from the HOA lay on the table in front of them, the words still burning in their mind. 500%. The number echoed in the silence, mocking them. But it wasn't just about the money. No, this was something more insidious. The HOA wasn't just increasing fees. They were asserting dominance, making sure everyone knew who was in charge. A slow, simmering rage bubbled to the surface. This wasn't just about protesting an increase. This was war. Alex knew that now. If they wanted to stop the HOA from turning this neighborhood into a corporate playground, they needed to act fast. A flicker of an idea ignited in Alex's mind, sharp and daring. Find the cracks, break them open. Hours passed as Alex dove into research, searching through old HOA meeting minutes, financial reports, and public records. It wasn't just about the fees. There was something bigger going on beneath the surface. Alex stumbled upon a series of irregularities, funds misappropriated, unexplained expenses, and most suspiciously, a history of shady contractors paid exorbitant amounts for jobs that were either unfinished or unnecessary. The more Alex dug, the more it became clear. This wasn't just an increase, it was a scam, and the HOA was lining their pockets while the residents paid the price. The excitement was palpable. Alex knew they had to share this with others. But there was a risk, a huge one. The HOA didn't take kindly to dissent, and the last thing they wanted was to become a target. But this was the chance Alex had been waiting for. By dawn, Alex had compiled everything, evidence, notes, and a plan. They weren't going to play by the HOA's rules anymore. They were going to change the game. The first step was simple. Reach out. But not just to anyone. Alex needed allies. Neighbors who were tired of being pushed around. People who, like them, had been quietly suffering under the HOA's iron fist. They made a few calls, sent some discreet messages, and waited. It didn't take long for a few familiar faces to respond. Sarah, Paul, and a handful of others who had been silently seething at the HOA's arrogance. Alex could feel the spark of something stronger than frustration building. This wasn't just a group of people. This was a movement. But even as the plan started to take shape, a sense of unease settled over Alex. They weren't naive enough to think the HOA would back down easily. They had power, and they would use it to protect their interests. But Alex wasn't backing down. The battle had just begun, and they weren't going to let fear stop them from fighting for what was right. As the first light of morning broke through the window, Alex stood, the evidence spread out before them. Their fingers hovered over the phone. One call, one message. The next move was critical. The adrenaline surge. This was it. The moment they would either rise up or be crushed by the weight of the HOA's control. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tense moments. Alex didn't have the luxury of waiting. Every second counted now. The evidence they had gathered was undeniable. But the challenge wasn't just gathering facts. It was making sure the right people saw them. People who could take action. People who could stand up and fight. It was a quiet, almost secretive process. Alex made sure to meet with only a few trusted neighbors at a time. Sarah, Paul, and others joined in, but always behind closed doors, always with a sense of urgency. The fear of being watched lingered over every conversation, making their words deliberate, cautious. If the HOA was listening, even the slightest slip could ruin everything. The first gathering was at Sarah's house. It was small, but the tension in the room was palpable. The fluorescent lights above hummed as Alex set the pile of documents on the table. Their fingers tapped the edge of the stack nervously. For a moment, there was silence as everyone scanned the contents of the records. Sarah spoke first, her voice a low murmur, barely above a whisper. "This is big, Alex. This could destroy them. But we need to be careful. They have eyes everywhere." Her tone carried a weight that only someone who had lived under the HOA's thumb for years would understand. Paul, his brow furrowed, leaned forward. "If we're going to do this, we can't back down. The HOA's not going to let this slide. They'll fight dirty." Alex nodded, their mind already racing ahead. The fear was there, yes, but so was the conviction. This wasn't just about fighting for what was right. It was about showing the HOA that they couldn't push people around anymore. "All right," Alex said, their voice steady but with a sharp edge. "We start small. We gather more neighbors. People who've been silently paying their dues, who feel like they have no choice. We don't go public yet, but we put the pressure on. We target their biggest vulnerability." Sarah and Paul exchanged looks. They both knew what Alex meant. The money. The HOA's entire operation relied on the fees that residents paid. If they could disrupt that flow even slightly, it would send a ripple effect through the organization. The plan was simple. Quietly, Alex and the others would start withholding their payments. Just a small, coordinated delay to create doubt. Nothing that could immediately draw the HOA's ire, but enough to force their hand. If enough residents did it, if the HOA saw even the slightest crack in their income, they would have no choice but to respond. But there was a catch. If they were caught, the HOA would likely retaliate. There would be fines, possible legal action, and at worst, a smear campaign designed to turn the neighborhood against them. It would be a dangerous game. As Alex's group dispersed, there was an unspoken understanding. This would be a test. If the HOA reacted, it would confirm their suspicions, that the board wasn't just interested in maintaining the neighborhood, they were more interested in controlling it. The first few days passed quietly. Too quietly. Alex checked the mail every afternoon, eyes scanning for any letter with the familiar HOA logo. Every time the doorbell rang, their hearts skipped a beat. Was it them? Was the HOA aware? The suspense gnawed at Alex's resolve, but they pushed through, focusing on the plan. Then, one afternoon, the first letter arrived. It was addressed to Alex. The return address was unmistakable, the HOA. Alex opened it slowly, their pulse quickening. The letter was concise, almost too formal. "We've noticed a discrepancy in your recent payments. Kindly remit the overdue amount immediately to avoid further action." Alex's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The HOA was already reacting. The question wasn't if they'd retaliate now. It was how far they were willing to go. But Alex didn't panic. They were ready for this. The first move had been made. Now, the real game began. They slid the letter into their desk drawer, a small, tight smile playing on their lips. This was exactly what they had been hoping for. The HOA was rattled. And that was only the beginning. The days following the first letter were like walking a tightrope. Every sound, every footstep outside Alex's door made their heart race. The fear of retaliation from the HOA was real, but it was tempered by a growing sense of determination. The ball was now in their court, and there was no going back. But the response didn't come immediately. The silence stretched, thicker and thicker, until it felt like the walls were closing in. Alex paced their living room, staring at the clock. A day passed, then another. By the third day, the anxiety was suffocating. What was taking them so long? Was the HOA gathering its resources for a major counterattack? Were they planning something bigger? Or had they underestimated the residents' resolve? Thinking this was just a small protest they could squash with a few threats. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA was up to something. There was no way they would just let this slide. So, Alex kept up the quiet work, contacting more neighbors, spreading the word, encouraging others to hold back on their payments. If the HOA thought it was just a small glitch, they were wrong. The movement was growing, quietly but steadily. Then, the unexpected happened. One afternoon, as Alex stepped outside to check the mail, they found something more than just the usual bills. An envelope, once again from the HOA, sat at the edge of the mailbox. This time, it was thick, much thicker than before. With a feeling of dread curling in their gut, Alex tore it open. The first line made their stomach drop. Due to ongoing issues with payment discrepancies, your account has been flagged for non-compliance. Failure to remit full payment within 72 hours will result in a formal hearing, where further penalties may be applied, including fines and possible legal action. The letter went on, but Alex didn't need to read any further. The HOA had escalated their tactics. A formal hearing. Legal action. The gloves were coming off. They took a deep breath, folding the letter carefully and returning it to the envelope. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was their declaration of war. The HOA wasn't going to back down. They were digging in, preparing to fight back with everything they had. But Alex wasn't afraid. They knew that this was just another move in the game. The first real sign that the HOA was starting to feel the pressure. Alex's mind raced. The next move was crucial. They couldn't just sit back and wait for the HOA to dictate the terms. If they did, they'd lose everything. But how could they keep up the momentum? And then, the answer came to them like a flash of lightning. Alex grabbed their phone and dialed Sarah's number. "It's time," Alex said, voice low and urgent. "We're going public." Sarah hesitated for just a moment. "Are you sure? This is dangerous. Once we do this, there's no turning back." Alex's voice was steady, resolve hardening in their chest. "If we don't do this now, we'll never have the chance. They've already shown their hand. If we want to win, we have to show them that we're not backing down. We take this public. We expose them for what they are." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a sigh. "All right. I'm in. Let's do it." And with that, the game had shifted. It wasn't just about withholding payments anymore. It was about forcing the HOA into the open, shining a light on their dark practices. Alex and their allies began planning their next move, drawing up a strategy to expose the HOA's corruption in a way that the entire community could see. But there was a danger in this too. Going public meant putting a target on their backs. The HOA would pull every trick in the book to discredit them, to turn the neighborhood against them. Alex knew that once the first article or post was shared, there would be no going back. They would be all in. As the first draft of their plan took shape, Alex stood in the center of their kitchen, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on them. This was no longer just about money. This was about power. And in that moment, Alex realized something. This was their chance to take back what had been stolen, to show the HOA that they could no longer control the fate of the neighborhood. But as they stared down at the letter in their hands, the words that stood out weren't the threats of legal action. They were the ones in the very last line, buried deep beneath the official tone. Please be advised. Any further actions taken against this HOA will result in a full investigation into your personal finances, including assets and liabilities. The subtle threat hit harder than the rest. It wasn't just a warning anymore. The HOA was willing to dig into their personal life, try to intimidate them into submission. But Alex wasn't backing down. The stakes had never been higher. The decision had been made. Going public was no longer an option. It was the only choice. Alex could feel the weight of that realization pressing down on them, making each breath feel heavier. They had already been threatened, targeted, and now there was no retreat. Once the first piece of evidence hit the public eye, it would ignite a chain reaction that would either make or break their entire plan. Sarah was the first to contact a local journalist, someone who had written about neighborhood disputes in the past. They had worked together before on smaller community matters, but this was different. This wasn't just a story, it was a war. But what was most unnerving to Alex was the response. Sarah had briefed the journalist on the HOA's activities, showing them the evidence they had gathered, but the journalist had been oddly quiet after hearing everything. "They're interested, Alex," Sarah had said on the phone, but there was a hesitation in her voice that Alex couldn't ignore. "But they're nervous. This isn't just about bad management. This could make a lot of powerful people very angry." It wasn't just the HOA's board members that Alex had to worry about now. It was the contractors, the politicians, the local businesses in cahoots with them, all the players who were benefiting from the HOA's shady dealings. Alex had seen their names pop up repeatedly in the documents, names that held weight in the community. Taking them down wasn't just risky, it was dangerous. Despite the hesitation, they had pushed forward. It was time to act. By the time the story was ready to go live, Alex felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for the storm to break, but nothing could have prepared them for the response. Within hours of the article being published online, the first wave of retaliations hit. A knock at the door. Alex opened it to find two uniformed officers standing on the porch. "We're here about a complaint filed by your HOA," the first officer said, his expression grim. "You're being accused of trespassing and harassment. There's a report stating that you've been attempting to organize an unlawful protest. We're here to talk." Alex's heart raced. Of course, they'd go to the police first. The HOA knew exactly where to hit, right at their foundation. It was one of the oldest tricks in the book. They couldn't silence the story, so they'd try to silence Alex. "Is this a joke?" Alex demanded, their voice shaking with a mix of fury and disbelief. "A complaint? What are you even talking about?" The officer didn't respond immediately. Instead, he handed over a piece of paper, a formal complaint. The document was signed by a well-known HOA board member, someone Alex had learned to dread during the last few meetings. The very same person who had been behind the fee hikes. It was the perfect move, using the law as a weapon. "I've been advised to inform you that if you continue your actions, we'll have no choice but to escalate this matter," the officer said coldly. Alex slammed the door shut, feeling the reality of the situation slam into them with the force of a freight train. They couldn't back down now. Not after everything. But the fight was about to get far uglier than they had anticipated. With the police breathing down their neck and the HOA pushing harder, Alex's group scrambled to stay one step ahead. They knew that any misstep could cost them everything. They met in secret, communicating through encrypted messages, organizing their next moves like shadows in the night. And then came the second wave. The article had gone viral. And soon, it wasn't just the local community buzzing. Online forums, local news stations, even people from neighboring towns started sharing the story. The pressure on the HOA intensified, and it became clear that they were scrambling to regain control. But in their desperation, they'd made a mistake. A second letter arrived. This one wasn't from the HOA directly. It was from one of the contractors the HOA had been using for improvements. The letter was framed as a friendly reminder about unpaid services, demanding an absurdly inflated fee for non-existent work completed in the neighborhood. The HOA was making its move again, but this time, Alex wasn't alone. They had the public watching, the pressure mounting from every angle. People were beginning to question the HOA's entire operation, and that was exactly what Alex wanted. The more eyes on them, the less the HOA could hide. With the letter in hand, Alex stood before their mirror, eyes steely with determination. This wasn't just about withholding payments anymore. It wasn't about legal threats or small protests. This was about forcing the HOA into the open, exposing their lies, and turning the community against them once and for all. But as Alex turned to head out the doorbell rang again. They opened it cautiously, expecting more trouble. But what stood before them wasn't another officer or even another threat. It was an envelope, plain and unmarked. The sender, the HOA. Alex's stomach churned as they tore it open, the feeling of dread growing with every second. But the contents weren't what they expected. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a legal threat. It was something far worse. Alex's hands trembled as they stared at the envelope. The HOA had just upped the stakes once again. The fact that it was unmarked, no return address, no official logo, only deepened the sense of dread that settled in their chest. For a moment, Alex stood frozen in place, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. They had expected another legal threat, perhaps a demand for payment or a warning, but this felt different. Their fingers finally broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. The handwriting was scrawled in bold, jagged letters, a stark contrast to the clean, formal language the HOA usually used. The message was brief, but it hit Alex like a punch to the gut. "We know who you are. We know everything. Stop this now, or you'll regret it." The words echoed in Alex's mind. The threat was clear, but the implications, what did they know? The HOA had already shown they weren't afraid to dig into personal lives. They'd used the police, manipulated contractors, and tried to stifle the truth. But this felt personal. It wasn't just a threat to the neighborhood. It was a threat to Alex, to their very existence. The door slammed shut behind Alex as they stood frozen in shock. The letter crinkled in their hand as they felt the edges of their resolve begin to fray. What was happening? Had the HOA really uncovered something that could destroy them? Before Alex could process the full weight of the message, the phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. "Alex, you need to see this." Sarah's voice crackled urgently. "I got something strange, and it's not good." Alex's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "There's a video. Someone just posted it online. It's got your name on it. The HOA's name too. It's got everything. Your research, photos of meetings, even the stuff we didn't put out there yet." Alex's stomach churned. "Who did this?" "I don't know. But it's already spreading. You've got to see it for yourself." Without another word, Alex rushed to the living room, turned on the computer, and searched the video platform Sarah mentioned. The video was titled "The Truth About the HOA's Corruption" and featured a grainy shot of Alex's research documents, alongside footage from HOA meetings, the photos of contractors receiving strange payments, and snippets of private messages from Alex's group. The video was damning, showing not only the evidence they had gathered, but also making it clear that Alex and their neighbors were organizing. But the most chilling part, at the end of the video, the words, "We know who you are," flashed across the screen. It was the same phrase from the letter. Alex's breath hitched. Whoever had uploaded the video wasn't just playing a game anymore. This was an all-out attack. They'd made it personal, and now their worst fear was realized. The HOA wasn't just trying to silence the group. They were trying to destroy them. The phone rang again, this time with Paul's name on the screen. "Alex," Paul said, his voice hoarse. "They'd gone too far. The video's everywhere. People are already calling for your resignation. They're even posting things about your family. You need to stop this." Alex clenched their fists, a fire igniting within them. "I'm not backing down, Paul. This is bigger than us now. If they think they can scare me into submission, they've made a huge mistake." There was silence on the other end, and then Paul spoke again, more softly this time. "You've got to be careful. This could turn violent. They'll use anything they can against you." Alex's mind raced, but their resolve never wavered. Violence, that's what the HOA wanted. Intimidation, fear, control. But they couldn't let it work. The more they dug into the HOA's tactics, the more they realized it wasn't just about money or power. The HOA had been protecting something much darker for years. And now, they were desperate to keep it hidden. Alex's fingers hovered over the keyboard as the weight of the situation pressed down on them. The HOA had shown their hand. They were willing to go to any lengths to protect themselves. And now, Alex had to make a choice. Continue playing the HOA's game, or expose everything to the world. If they could just gather enough evidence, if they could bring this to light, there was a chance, just a chance, that they could bring the whole corrupt system down. The next step wasn't just a choice anymore. It was a gamble. And it was the only one Alex had left. But as they turned to the window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood, a chill ran down their spine. They weren't alone. There, in the shadows, someone was watching. They were being hunted now, and they didn't know how much longer they had before the HOA's forces came crashing down. The tension in the air was suffocating. Alex's hands clenched into fists, their body trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. They had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. Every step, every decision had led to this moment. The HOA's grip on the neighborhood seemed unbreakable, their threats growing more personal and dangerous with each passing day. The video had spread like wildfire. And now, Alex was not just a target. They were the face of the resistance. Everyone was watching. And the HOA was waiting, like a predator closing in on its prey. But Alex wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when the truth was within reach. The letter, the video, the threats, they only made Alex more determined to expose the truth, to show the community what the HOA had been hiding all along. But there was still one piece left of the puzzle, something so crucial it could bring the entire operation crumbling down. Alex's mind raced as they stood in the middle of their living room, surrounded by stacks of documents and evidence. The phone calls, the meetings, the threats, it was all coming to a head. The HOA thought they had Alex cornered, but what they didn't know was that Alex had a secret weapon. The missing link, the one piece of evidence they had yet to reveal. It wasn't just about the illegal fee hikes, the misappropriated funds, or the shady contracts. No, this was bigger. It was the internal communications. Emails, memos, meeting minutes, proof that the HOA had been running a covered operation with high-level contractors to buy up properties in the neighborhood, flipping them for huge profits. It was a scheme designed to push out longtime residents and bring in wealthier buyers, all under the guise of community improvement. This was it, the smoking gun, the one thing that could shatter the HOA's carefully constructed facade. Alex's phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "The press is all over it. We need to act now, before they can spin this story. The HOA's trying to block us, but I think we've got a chance if we move fast." Alex's heart pounded. It's time. Let's do it. They quickly gathered the final piece of evidence, the key email thread that implicated several HOA members and local business leaders in the conspiracy. With shaking hands, Alex attached it to an encrypted message and sent it to every major local news outlet, as well as several independent journalists they knew had a track record of exposing corruption. The email was clear, the evidence irrefutable. The HOA's operation wasn't just about controlling fees. It was a well-coordinated scheme to buy up the neighborhood, to turn it into a playground for the rich, while quietly pushing out families who had lived there for generations. This wasn't just a scam. It was an all-out attack on the community. The minutes ticked by like hours, the suspense gnawing at Alex's insides. They knew the moment they pressed send, there was no going back. If the HOA retaliated, and they would, it would be with everything they had. But Alex wasn't afraid anymore. The truth had been unleashed, and the public couldn't be silenced. Then, as if on cue, the phone rang. It was Paul, his voice shaking. "It's happening, Alex. The news stations just picked up the story. They're airing it tonight. The HOA's scrambling. Their board members are already denying everything, but they can't hide from the truth." Alex's heart soared. It was working. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it now. The public outcry grew louder as the minutes passed. Neighbors, former residents, even people who had never lived in the area began flooding social media with their own stories of how the HOA had manipulated them, taken advantage of their trust. And then, as the sun set on that fateful evening, the twist Alex had feared arrived. A final, unexpected letter slipped under their door. It was an official summons. The HOA had filed a defamation lawsuit, but the twist wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was the fact that, buried in the details of the summons, was a clause for a public trial. A trial that would force the HOA's dirty secrets into the light of day for the world to see. Alex stared at the paper in their hands, the weight of it sinking in. The fight wasn't over. The battle had only just begun. But now, they weren't alone. The neighborhood, the community, and the public were on their side. And as the reality of what was happening settled in, Alex realized that, for the first time in months, they felt something they hadn't felt before: hope. The HOA had underestimated them, underestimated the power of truth. And now, the neighborhood was finally going to take back what had been stolen from them. The fight was far from over, but the end was in sight. Alex smiled, their resolve steeled. This was just the beginning.